All right, boys and girls. Today we are going to classify and organize quadrilaterals. And I'm going to write this up here. They are four-sided figures or four-sided polygons. That's what we call a quadrilateral. There are lots of types of quadrilaterals, and you did get a sheet that talks about those and breaks all those down. And so I want you to reference that if there are some that are new that you're not aware of. And that's going to help you learn some of that vocabulary. So we're in module 10 through 20. And I'm actually going to go ahead and flip the page. And we're going to look at page 506. Page 506. Okay. A lot of vocabulary here. So a parallelogram is a quadrilateral or a four-sided figure with pairs of opposite sides that are congruent and parallel. A lot of times we see a parallelogram look like this. I always say it's like a sideways rectangle. Some parallelogram have special names based on their properties. Now, like I said, a lot of times this is how we see a parallelogram, but that doesn't mean that's the only way we'll see it. It has opposite sides that are congruent and parallel. Lots of different quadrilaterals have that. Just like a square, but it does have opposite sides that are congruent and parallel. So don't think that this is a parallelogram only. Lots of things can be called and classified as a parallelogram. So we're going to look at that together. All right, so let's complete this chart. Well, actually, so then a rectangle, a parallelogram with four right angles. This is what we most of the time think of when we see rectangle, but again, with my square example, doesn't a square have four right angles? Yes, so this can also be classified as a rectangle. A rhombus is a parallelogram with four congruent sides. Most of the time, a rhombus kind of looks like this. I say like a sideways square. But a square is also could be considered a rhombus. A rhombus just has to have four equal sides. And a square is a parallelogram with four congruent sides and four right angles. So you can't really call anything else a square but a square. But you can call these other things squares because a square carries all those same attributes. All right, so let's look at this. It says quadrilateral. Two pairs of congruent parallel sides. Okay, so it says yes. So two pairs of congruent parallel sides we could call a parallelogram. Are all the sides congruent? Yes. If it's a parallelogram with all sides congruent, then that's going to be a rhombus. Are all sides meeting at right angles? That could be a rectangle. But like I'm saying, there could be different answers here. Which one, all sides are congruent and all sides meet at right angles? That would be a square. So kind of like we already talked about, what attributes does a square have in common with a rhombus? So, all rhombuses have four congruent or equal sides, and squares are rhombuses. I always say, if you're asked, is a square a rhombus? Think about what a rhombus is and think, does the square do everything a rhombus has to do? So squares also have 4 congruent sides. What attributes does a rectangle have in common with a parallelogram? And this is a possible answer, not the only answer. It's a nice big word. A parallelogram has pairs of, definitely, parallel sides, and the sides are congruent. Like we said above, rectangles are parallelograms. So rectangles have opposite sides parallel, and those opposite sides are congruent. I know that's a lot of writing, a little sloppy. Okay, so let's look at this next page, 507. I'm going to go on down to number 1. But I want to look at this word, trapezoid. There are 2 accepted definitions of a trapezoid. One says the trapezoid has exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. The other defines it as having at least 1 pair of parallel sides. Okay, so that makes it a little more confusing. Now, here's how you're normally going to see a trapezoid is a shape like this. And here's our 1 pair of parallel sides. This second definition is the one that, not actually this one, exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. That is how we see trapezoid, and that's how I've always seen it at when we've taken tests and things like that. And this is most of the time what a trapezoid looks like, but it doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it looks like this, where you have a straight side here, but again, there's those parallel, there's those parallel. Okay, so Tanya says a trapezoid has exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. It says what other quadrilateral that we've learned about is that way. So exactly 1 pair. There would be no other, none, because the ones we talked about, like the parallelogram, the rectangle, the rhombus, and the square, they all had 2 pairs of parallel sides. So the trapezoid is very unique. None, the rest, have 2 pairs of parallel sides. Okay? Identify each statement as true or false. This is the type of things we're going to see when we do take tests, so we need to be careful that we don't let these words mess us up. It says, a parallelogram is always a rhombus. Think about what a rhombus is first. Okay, is a parallelogram a rhombus? Well, first of all, let's think about what we know about a rhombus. And you can look back at your other page. A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. A parallelogram is always a rhombus. Does every parallelogram always have 4 equal sides? No, that is false. Think about a parallelogram that we see the most. It doesn't have 4 equal sides. This parallelogram has opposite sides that are equal. All right, let's look at number 3. A rhombus is always a parallelogram. So let's look at what we said parallelogram was. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral with pairs of opposite sides that are congruent and parallel. So let's think of a rhombus. A rhombus has 4 congruent sides. Does it do what a parallelogram has to do? Does it have opposite sides that are congruent and parallel? Yes. A rhombus does have all the attributes that make something a parallelogram. Number 4, a square is always a rhombus. Let's look back at what a rhombus is. A parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent and parallel, with 4 congruent or equal sides. Does a square have that? Yes. Because we know a square has 4 equal sides, and it is a parallelogram. And so number 5, a rectangle is always a rhombus. Remember, a rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides, 4 equal sides. Does a rectangle always have those characteristics? No. It doesn't. It isn't always. It doesn't have 4 equal sides. All right, boys and girls, so there is our lesson on quadrilaterals. Make sure that you're looking at your anchor chart that shows you these different quadrilaterals also.